this video, I'll be talking about comic books and graphic novels. These two formats can be identified by the use of comics formatting, like panels and speech bubbles and written sound effects. These formats often rely heavily on a combination of dialogue and visual storytelling. There are a lot of things going on in a single page of comics. In order to comprehend this page, for instance, a reader must be able to identify the correct order in which to read the panels and speech bubbles, read the words in the speech bubbles, combine that with actions and details from the images, and then produce meaning from all of that combined. Comics and graphic novels also tend to have a shared vocabulary of symbols that regular readers become familiar with, like this, and they have to learn how to interpret those and add that to the meaning as well. There are also, of course, comic books and graphic novels for older children who are fluent readers, all the way up through books for teens and adults. Comics are often associated with kids, but only because of complaints about comic books that happened in the 40s and 50s. And at the time, some people, especially teachers and librarians that should have known better, decided that comic books were bad for children. And since all everyone heard about all throughout that time period was comic books and children and how they're destroying children's literacy, people actually came to associate comic books almost exclusively with children, but they've never been only for children. Even today, though, the influence of those concerns from the 40s and 50s has an impact. Many people still think of comics as being less valuable literacy than books full of words, like a traditional novel. Even though there's been plenty of evidence showing the benefits of allowing and even encouraging children to read more visual narratives. The term graphic novel specifically, was an attempt by some to try to give comic books a little bit more respectability, which is why some people will argue that comic books and graphic novels are the same thing and one just has a fancier name. Over time, though, I would say that graphic novels have taken on a life of their own, with distinctly longer and more complicated plots than your traditional comic book. So the term comic book and the term graphic novel can be used interchangeably in many situations, but they do have slightly different meanings, and that's worth clearing up at this point. The term comic book usually refers to these things. They're floppy, they're thin, they're bound with staples, and they're often printed on shiny magazine-type paper. These are comic books. They're either episodes of the same story released over time, or different stories with the same characters, or just a bunch of stories in the same genre that have been put together, like a collection of short stories, but in comics formatting. They're often released on a monthly schedule or so, and assigned numbers like volume or issue 1, and all the way up through the hundreds, as these series often just keep going and going. Whereas the term graphic novel usually refers to thicker books, like this one, that have a proper book binding and a longer overall narrative like a novel. They can still be printed on that same shiny paper or on normal book paper, often if they're black and white. And there might still be a series of them, like this one's just book 1 series. But each piece is long, like a series of novels would be long. And that part about it being one complete story is important. So even if a few comic books are bound together, like this book that has comics 1 through 3 of the Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, it would still be considered a comic book because these are still those short stories, those episodic little stories. They've just been rebound together for ease. So that here you have 1 through 3, but you could also have them separately as Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3 in different books, and that's how they would have originally been published. I find it helpful to compare comic books and graphic novels to TV shows and movies. They're both filmed entertainment and use a lot of the same tricks and trends, but TV shows, like comic books, are split into short numbered episodes, usually released over time, and some shows have episodes that contribute to an overall plotline, and others are just different stories with the same characters, and others are different stories altogether that are just bound together in the same season. Movies, on the other hand, like graphic novels, are longer units of storytelling. There can still be a series of them, but each one will be more contained and more long and substantial on its own. I should also mention manga, which is a format that came out of Japan, but is common in several countries now. And these are more often like graphic novels in terms of their thickness and length, but they're almost always in a series, and often a long series at that. Since Japanese is read from right to left, and not from left to right like English is, manga are also constructed to read from right to left, even when they're translated to English. So readers of manga, even in English, have to get used to reading not just the
pages from right to left, but also the order of the panels. However, some books like this one take that into consideration and include a little guide in the beginning for English-speaking readers to figure out how to read manga, especially for young readers for whom this might be their first time encountering panels in this order.
Recently, there has been a really popular trend to publish lots of books that combine comic-like illustrations with lots of standard narrative text. The Diary of a Wimpy Kid falls into this category, and so does The Strange Case of Origami Yoda. And you'll find in these books that it's not quite a graphic novel. If I look at it, you'll note that there's a lot of just paragraphs of text and not a whole lot of comics formatting all over the place. There's not panels all across the page. And yet the illustrations here do a lot more storytelling than you would expect from traditional decorative illustrations in like a standard middle grade novel, where they're just there to be an extra sort of add-on, but they're not essential to the story like these ones are. And you can see they're even using things like speech bubbles here in this case. For this reason, some folks call these hybrid novels, and I like having that kind of separate term rather than lumping them in with graphic novels and comic books, because they are kind of doing a different thing, even if they're borrowing from those different formats to do it. Overall, graphic novels and comic books are both valuable formats, with slightly different qualities, but both require a lot of complex reading skills to navigate and comprehend fully, and that makes them a valuable part of any collection of children's books.